Good evening. Good evening and welcome very, very much to Conversations, where I'm truly very pleased to welcome to the program two gentlemen that have a very, very good and long-term interest and understanding of the evolution of the American economy, with particular reference to some labor policy developments that are crucial to the forward movement of our economy. And if I may introduce the guests, we get into a conversation. On my immediate left, we have Mr. A.H. Raskin. And Mr. Raskin, after a long and distinguished career with the New York Times, it spans, I think, something like 46 years as labor writer.
Yes, I started in 1931, was thrown out the door in 1977.
Well, right. In any event, he's now with the National News Council, and Mr. Raskin, indeed, welcome very, very much to Conversation. And on my far left, we have Louis Kelso, who is no stranger at all to the guests, to the viewers of Conversations. He's with Kelso and Company and is a pioneer in the development of ESOP and other methods for the extending of ownership into the general citizenry beyond what normally and historically we have. And gentlemen, welcome very, very much to Conversations indeed.
Pleasure to be here, Harold.
Mr. Raskin, after you have been called with great appropriateness the dean of the writers, or the people observing the development of the American scene, from a labor perspective, and you just attended the AFL-CIO
Yes, I was down
in
Florida at the convention.
Do you sense yourself, after your long career, a shift in thinking among the people that represent the labor leadership, and do you sense a shift in thinking among those who are generally responsible for the evolution of the American economy as it relates to labor policy? I wonder, maybe a broad general question.
Well, Harold, I wish I detected as much of a change in thinking as there ought to be. There is no question that the whole underpinning of labor management relations, and indeed the nature of work, the nature of the workers who make up our labor force, and the problems of industrial survival for the country are very patently, radically different from what they were in the period, never mind of Sam Gompers going back a century ago, but in the period of George Meany and the merger of the AFL-CIO in 1955. Things have changed in a way that really requires the trade union movement to reassess its reason for being. It was historically predicated on the concept of more, and labor likes to translate that in a broad way, that it was not just more money, but more of social benefit and so on. But essentially, as Jimmy Hoffa used to put it rather crudely, bringing back the highest buck was what it was all about. Now, unions more and more find themselves negotiating for less. So there's a whole new ball game, and many of the basic industries, the heartland of organized labor, are threatened with extinction. Now, I don't want to develop this, could take a whole hour to develop, but there ought to be a kind of rethinking, and I don't want to pretend that the present leadership is obtuse or insensitive to the problems, but there is a great reluctance and inertia that keeps them from doing the kind of rethinking that's necessary.
It might be fair, it would seem to me, it's not only the labor leader, it's those responsible for the broad evolution of the economy. It seems to be moving into areas that are giving us a great deal of problems, not only people in labor positions that are responsible for labor management, but in governmental or in management positions as well.
Absolutely.
The economy is going through a major shift, and of course
And in corporate management and in corporate finance. It seemed to me, Abe, and I'm sure this has struck you many times, that there is a strange obliviousness on the part of both management and labor to where the consumers will get the money to buy. And now that blindness takes many forms. In the case of management, it sees nothing strange about encouraging technological change, which eliminates jobs. This is one of its main purposes, and encouraging conventional finance, which builds the ownership of capital into the stationary base that's been owning it for 100 years. Now, those aren't the people who do the consuming. How do the consumers get their money? Well, 52% of federal taxes and 60% of state taxes on the average, income taxes, are collected from the people who earn to give to the people who need. Now,
transfer payments,
nothing in our economic history ever suggests that that's a proper thing to do. And as I read the Constitution, I think it's improper to do it. And yet, you can't have mass production without mass consumption.
Yes, if I could just interrupt, and perhaps this, Harold, was what you were about to say, your story about the impact of robots and new technology does bring to mind a story of Walter Reuther's visit to a Ford engine plant, the very first plant that was automated in the auto industry, and one of the vice presidents of Ford said rather gloatingly, "Well, Mr. Reuther, where are your dues payers going to come from when this becomes the pattern for the industry?" And of course Walter said, "And where are your customers going to come from?" And the robots are doing all the work.
It was a good question then, it's a good question now. Huh?
But there is an answer now, and the answer is that the people who own the machine, the capital workers who own the capital, if they collect the wages of their capital, can buy cars. No doubt about it. This is where the thing comes to a manipulable or solvable problem. Management, using the tools that I've developed, can build ownership into the employees to its advantage, independently of how it may react to how the employees may react. But in the meanwhile, it's putting earning power in potential customers. Labor has the right to ask for the same thing. The use of the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, or ESOP, is a collectively bargainable fact of life. That's an awesome statement. And yet no labor union has ever stepped up. We recently saw the purchase of a billion-dollar corporation, Norton Simon Inc., by another billion-dollar corporation, Esmark. Any labor union in that company could have stepped up to management and said, "We want to investigate whether the employees of this company, members of our union and others, could buy this before you sell it to a stranger and further concentrate its ownership." Now we're talking about a billion-dollar asset.
Incredible, yeah.
And 40,000 employees, which means 40,000 families.
Absolutely mammoth, yeah.
But no labor union did it.
Now why haven't they? Why haven't they?
Lou's statement, though, does bring up something that I think, and this, to me, Lou, is one of the constructive developments that came out of the recent recession. Still very much of a recession, but we're beginning to recover from it. But the crunch that was put on many corporations and on many trade unions to survive awakened them to the notion that the old adversarial thing really had had its day and that they had to cooperate. And so you have a very well-developed redefinition in many of the leading corporations, General Motors and Ford, the steel companies and so on, of what is known as the quality of work life movement, which I translate as a kind of participatory democracy that would find its finest expression and fullest expression in employee stock ownership, profit sharing, and a full sharing then of the benefits of a basically cooperative approach to survival.
But it does have a bit of a problem, or has had a bit of a problem,
Very
because
much
of the
so.
traditional adversarial attitude on the part
Partly
of the
that,
labor
and
people
partly
toward the
because,
management.
it really does, as you can readily see, blur the traditional collective bargaining approach of us versus them. You sit down at a table, the management wants to give as little as it can get away with, short of a strike, and the union, of course, wants to get for its people as much as it can, and so that line gets blurred where you're sitting as owner as well as representative.
Yeah, and strangely enough, in many cases, the managements themselves, in many instances, don't have that much ownership themselves, in a certain sense of their bargain. That's another issue. Yeah?
It's the most unexplainable propertyless class on earth.
That's right. Management has ceased to be an owner class.
Two or
in
three
any
top
way.
guys have it, but that's all.
Yeah, well, that might be worth reiterating, because that's been a thesis of yours, is that the ownership of the technology that's increasingly responsible for production in the economy is held by a very, very narrow group of people.
Less
That's
actually,
a basic fact, but maybe...
The total ownership of capital in the U.S. economy, land structures, machines, certain intangibles, is in the top 5% of wealth holders. What falls outside of that is trivial. But the great bulk of that is in the top 1%.
But how, without exaggerating the degree to which there is an open-mindedness developing on both sides of the equation, because it's still, it's the oddballs who are moving, even though many of them are multi-billion-dollar and multinational corporations and similarly million-member unions, but it's still outside the mainstream. But the thing that is happening and that is compelling them to change is that there is almost a schizophrenic quality which you become very conscious of when you go to a convention, as I did. And, you know, you have an eminently reasonable, rational human being like Lane Kirkland as president of the AFL-CIO, possessor of one of the best minds in the country and very non-ideological type. But most of the conversation there, and Lane himself was guilty of a good deal of it, was basically anti-business and so on. At the same time, Lane spends a large part of his time conferring with the heads of the biggest of big corporations on the development of an industrial policy for the revitalization of American industry. And you just have, you know, crazy kind of...
two men, rather.
Contradictory policies being, and with no effort to reconcile.
Yeah, it might reflect a broader schizophrenia in the general society with this increasing technological input and the general lack of discussion of it in public dialogue of the implications of it, such as you have both raised in your work.
It's a lack of discussion of the importance of ownership. And to a degree, that is due to something that has happened almost without comment. We have substantially destroyed the characteristic of private property in capital, equity capital. The typical stockholder today gets only, at best, a yield of about 1/12 of what the assets actually produce. State and federal taxes and the employer's share of Social Security taxes take over half. Boards of directors lacking a rational way to finance growth, which would be commercially insured credit, take 3/4 of what's left. Now that's 7/8 just gone bye-bye, and the fine print takes it down from an 1/8 down to a 1/12. Now, two things therefore have to be done. New financing techniques that simultaneously build the ownership into natural constituencies like employees, both managerial and sub-managerial, all employees, they're natural stockholders. Techniques that do that are step one, and the union has jurisdiction to require that, to push that into conversation.
Make a collectively bargainable point.
Exactly, and no one can be fired for raising that question.
No, what I think.
And secondly, they have the right to debate in collective bargaining the payment of the wages of capital to the new capital owners.
They'd have an interest in that then,
well,
increasingly.
And it doesn't mean anything if you just have that piece of paper. What's that? So.
Well, the interesting thing that is happening, Harold, and that makes me quite optimistic that for all the inertia that exists on both sides, we will be moving towards more of really giving workers a piece of the action through ESOPs, through profit sharing, is the degree to which participatory involvement and democratic rule is getting into this paramilitary structure of the factory or the office, where you know everything has traditionally come top down. Now you've got an awareness on the part of many in management, a belated awareness, that hey, these people down at the shop level have got some real ideas. They got intelligence as well as muscles, and we can profit by capitalizing on their ideas, getting them, treating them as adults with minds, with useful ideas, instead of just troublesome characters who give us a lot of problems with grievances and so on, and someday we'll have a robot that'll take care of them and it'll be much more efficient and so on.
So costs of production.
So the fact that there is, and also that the employees are reacting well to being given responsibility, to being...
and ownership, too.
Yeah.
Well, ownership is the ultimate expression.
Yeah, you would think in the sense that the two would go hand in hand, and that they would both move toward a more non-alienated attitude on the part of the workers toward the firms of which they're part. If they own part of it, and their voice is heard both.
The non-adversary.
The non-adversary.
And you see benefits, you know.
Yeah, if they can get that attitude, it's all to be encouraged, and yet there's not enough of that kind of thing. Has been going historically, but it's beginning to happen now.
Well, and it gets thrown into reverse every now and then because some whip cracker here or there, or somebody at the very top level, you know. Take the problems in U.S. Steel, where they finally got the union, after 3 tries, to persuade its members to go along on concessions that were badly needed. And the first thing the U.S. Steel management does immediately after is to start talking about a deal to bring in British Steel. Now, you know, the guys at the plant level say, hey, we've been double-crossed, we've been hoodwinked, and that sets the whole movement, then gives it yes, an unfortunate reversal.
Yeah, and it is too bad in the sense that we couldn't be a little bit more if it were on the international scale. We're becoming an interdependent world economic order. If there could be a greater degree of genuine competitiveness on the part of the American industry rather than having to move to protectionism.
But I don't think it can be solved initially on the international scale.
Well, and you find on the
domestically.
You find on the union side now with the incipient recovery, again, hey, wait a minute, time to stop these givebacks and so on. You know, start grabbing the old gimme spirit is back. So. It's not an easy, smooth, or predictably certain road, but I hope we'll move in that direction, and we sure ought to, and we need to.
Yeah. Doesn't this have to come, Abe, out of a redefinition of more, the basic union goal? More, where there are 2 ways to earn income, either as an owner of labor power, collecting the wages of labor, or an owner of capital, collecting the wages of capital, call them labor workers and capital workers if you would, where there are 2 ways to participate in production. And technology is shifting from labor intensive to capital intensive, then certainly a proper union goal is to redefine more in terms of the combined wages of labor and capital on the part of the workforce. Now that means building capital ownership into the workforce. And the tools are available to do it, and Congress has been lavish in its support and advantages that come from it. What's needed is the leadership, and I think the natural place for that leadership to come is for Elaine Kirkland or someone to get up and say, more now means more in the sense of there being 2 ways to earn income. And the reasonable lifestyle that we can't earn through work, we got to earn through capital. So let's get it in our people.
One of the indications of the myopia that still keeps even the brightest people immobilized in this area was the discussion down at the Florida AFL-CIO convention of the moves towards use of the bankruptcy laws to chisel out from under labor agreements. And the unions were rightly very upset about this and regarded it as a grave threat. Instead of saying, well, let's go 1 step further. Instead of the management going into bankruptcy court, why shouldn't we sit down with them and say, look, let's negotiate for employee stock ownership and a plan of reorganization based on getting the workers whom you're asking to make big sacrifices in wages and in work rules and in other established practices. They're entitled to a piece of this corporation, and then they, and of course it can't be the kind of thing that Lou was talking about earlier of the absorption of Norton Simon by Esmark or Bendix by Allied, so where the workers suddenly wake up one morning after being told you're all partners, we're in this together, and we all have to make sacrifices together and so on. Next day they suddenly find that the company they worked for is no longer in existence, and they're working for somebody else without anybody asking them, what do you think?
They're exactly like serfs on a feudal estate. The Duke lost the estate in a crap game.
And the Baron got it.
Went along with it, and all the people went along with it, like cattle. Exactly.
It's
insane. It's insane, and then that's got to be become get into the
And
contents.
especially in a country like this where you have a better educated workforce, more challenging and suspicious of all institutions to start with, you can't pull that kind of a flim-flam and expect workers to be really cooperative.
But they were very concerned about this bankruptcy direction, and then that in a sense reflects problems within the economy and a number of companies that could be very, very well served by ESOP financing and so on. One wonders again, on the face of it, why wasn't that brought up at that convention? Why wasn't it a keynote address to that effect? Well, you know, why?
Yeah, there was no discussion of ESOP. There's a lot of discussion of the investment of pension funds. As you know, there's now nearly $1 trillion stashed away as in the assets of employee pension funds in private industry and in public employment as well. A good deal of it collectively bargained, but again, the application of that, as Lou can discourse on, is really doesn't make any sense from the standpoint of the stability of the industries involved, and on the contrary, tends over the long pull to be an albatross, which in many industries, with the development of robots and fewer active workers carrying a heavy burden of retired workers, can really sink the whole industry.
Well, the problem there is Abe has put his finger on. The pension and profit sharing funds are actually adjuncts of the stock market. Only incidentally is the labor world involved, in that it's their money that is put into funds that are turned over anywhere from 50 to 100% per year. They have, since they're second-hand securities, this is not newly issued securities, the worker through that is connected with the yield on second-hand securities, 6-7% at best. And normally that's below the rate of inflation.
Yeah, right.
Now, at the moment we're trying to control inflation with a depression. But I don't think that lid will stay on very long. The pre-tax return on corporate assets, on the other hand, runs, in successful corporations, runs from 25 to 65% a year. So that the ESOP connects the employees with that big source of income and advantages the company as it does the employees both. It makes it possible, by the way, to have lifetime employment in the truest sense. It makes the Japanese definition of lifetime employment look artificial, which it is. Because a worker can enter the corporate world, the business world, the production world, as a labor worker, begin to pick up income and earnings as a capital worker, because corporations should be financed in ways that take in the natural constituency. Employees are natural shareholders.
Absolutely.
If there ever were any. And by the time they reach an age where they might conventionally retire, they may well say, the wages of my capital are adequate. I've got lots of things on my mind to do. I've been wanting to do all my life. I'm going to earn my income as wages on my capital. I'm going to go on and be productive till my dying day. I'll have an estate to hand on to my children. You fellas do the work. In the words of Lane Kirkland, this is one of the most interesting things I think he said down in that Florida thing, was quoted in the paper. He said, well, he said, we've all heard about the work ethic, but if that hard toil were so good, the rich would have kept it for themselves.
Right. And the bulk of the production, the earning is coming from this capital.
Now, he's laying a foundation for saying there's a much easier way to do it, and that's as a capital worker.
As every capital worker would know.
Yeah, and you don't stretch your suspenders nearly as much to do that.
Yeah, right, and you can have people having income for life's purposes, rent, food, and things they have to have by the fact they have a viable holding of ownership.
Without draining it off through the financial community, which sucks the blood out of it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the speed with which technology is moving and changing the nature of jobs and wiping out jobs, creating opportunities for other jobs, but at a much lesser rate, and in many cases at lesser pay, makes it more important than ever to get accepted and recognized this concept that you can get your income as wages in the traditional sense, wages for labor, or as wages for capital, and that the labor movement ought to be in the very forefront of agitating for that transition.
One of the problems has been the labor working people haven't had that much left over from the absolute needs of consuming that they had to consume in order to invest in the traditional
Well,
sense. We have techniques for helping them to do that.
No, the tax laws prohibit it, and there's no way to do it. If you had to buy stock in your own personal after-tax dollars, and the yield were only 6%, you'd be nuts to play with it. I mean, it's absolutely insane. Abe, I'd be very interested in your reaction. It seemed to me that something extraordinary has come out of the Reagan administration's push for deregulation. And it shows up everywhere, but it's showing up most clearly, of course, in the airlines.
And in trucking.
And in
railroads to some extent.
And in railroads, and it'll show up more. It becomes clear, and I don't know that the regulators themselves really see this yet, it becomes clear that regulation, in effect, kept the consumers captive while labor and management got more and more and more. I mean, if more was Gomper's term for the men in the shop, believe me, management, at all times it was more to the 10th power or something like that. What regulation did is hold the consumer still so that he could be exploited by this process. Now, what happens when the consumer breaks loose? Well, he goes for the lowest price guy. And so a teeny-weeny little airline can come in and knock over a big one because they sell for less. Now, what this really says is we should have been thinking about what was going on and realize that ultimately we all work for the consumer. Adam Smith said the purpose of production is consumption, has no other function whatsoever. So that any time we leave the consumer out of the formula, we should remember that. By changing the way in which people participate in production, from labor-intensive to capital-intensive, you avoid the exploitation of the consumer that regulation has made possible.
Yeah, and that brings us to a pretty kind of fix, as it were, and it's one that we are really confronting. There's a number of examples that have been able to be put together out of our historical experience. We want to talk some about the examples of some of the benefits that have accrued to companies that have gone with ESOP, because a number of them, increasingly larger companies, are moving that way. But we have to take just a little brief break here, if we may, just for a moment. We'll be coming right back and see if we can continue and wind this up. But it's incredibly exciting. But we'll just be, if you could hold with us, we'll be coming right back. And so just hold on for a minute. We're coming right back. We're back again with, if I may, on my immediate left, Mr. Lane Kirkland, who is, I mean, I'm sorry, Mr. A.H. Raskin.
That's part of employee stock ownership, right?
Right. Mr. A.H. Raskin, who is the Dean of the Writers on Labor Development here in the United States economy, and welcome, Mr. Raskin, and Louis Kelso, Kelso & Company ESOP Financing. We were talking in the earlier section of the show about the fact that we've had problems with people, the bankruptcy problem of some of the people in the labor movement are concerned with, and the general problems of the economy as we begin to move into a highly industrialized and technologically oriented productive system, and that there could be a great deal more ownership on the part of the workers and the general citizenry, and that's something that could be collectively bargainable. And we have had some increasing numbers of people who have, despite the difficulties and the general lack of dialogue in the public dialogue about this issue, there have been a number of companies that have managed to become ESOP, and there have been benefits that have been accruing to them. Maybe you could spell out, or maybe you could...
There are some. According to the Senate Finance Committee, there are between 5,000 and 6,000 ESOPs in operation in the United States. Many of them are not true ESOPs. They don't do everything that an ESOP could do. But many of them are sound and authentic ones. And they are getting into bigger and bigger companies. We're in the process of closing the third company in the billion-dollar sales category. The potential is virtually unlimited for a number of reasons. As things stand today, we accept as normal the public ownership of gigantic capital instruments, things like subways, office buildings, universities, water systems, even power systems. The fact of the matter is that one of the ways to restore the earning power and enhance the earning power of the American people is to privatize those facilities, have them taken over by private facilities corporations, with the use of the facilities leased to the normal using body. I mean, if it's a university, you lease it to the university. And in effect, the wages of the employees of the facility corporation are simply passed through to the university in the form of payments made for faculty, payments made for facilities and so on. But the course of that is to build the ownership of what is now public capital into individuals, take the cost off government. That's an enormous cost of government.
Certainly is.
But one of the heaviest costs of government are public pension systems. And when you build the ownership of, let's say, the New York subway system and then the public buildings into the employees of the city of New York, all of them, school employees, subway employees, administrative, and what have you, with the city committed to pay a rental which will give the stockholders a reasonable return, you've got the best guarantee on earth in terms of income, and you have no money wasted on second-hand securities at all.
Yeah, right.
I think you'd save the city of New York $1 billion every quarter.
Yeah, and bring a whole lot better service and get some of the capital needed for those services in the bargain.
And you would have the concern about the care of the facilities and the people who are using them.
All right, yeah.
Yes, sir. One of the things that Lou was talking about earlier is of interest, I think, in this connection, and that is the degree to which collective bargaining in many industries, and particularly in the regulated industries, or in those dealing directly with consumers, became a collusive process in which the union was understandably interested in getting the most for its people. Management was perfectly, as long as it had and used the union often as a stabilizing element in preventing competition, as long as it could determine what the price was, didn't care. The consumer was always left holding the bag on what often was almost an extortionate settlement. And this is part of the thing that has now created the problem, not only in the airlines and in the other trucking and railroads, but even in steel and elsewhere, where corporations are now being formed that are able to undercut construction industry, a big abuser of that collusive relationship, finding the same non-union penetration. If you got into an ESOP relationship, the whole focus would shift in ways that would be very beneficial, not only to the workers involved, and to the stability of the corporations, but even more important to us as citizens, to the consumer.
Yeah, you can begin to take the logic of ESOP and apply it into other aspects of the economy beyond the people within a corporate enclave specific for that, right?
Public utility regulators, if they really saw their job in the context of this discussion, would realize that what they have been doing is holding, let's say, the consumers of Pacific Gas and Electric Company in California, holding them still while conventional finance builds the ownership of all their facilities, billions and billions of dollars worth, those into foreign bondholders and stockholders, and a few local super rich stockholders and monitors. Yes, some of it gets into pension plans, but it's incidental. The fact of the matter is that none of it gets into the consumer, the utility consumers themselves, and yet they're the source of all the funding. It has to come from them. Consumer stock ownership plan financing is a variation, one of the 8 variations of the ESOP, which would simultaneously build the ownership into the consumers as the capital is paid for. And it's paid for anyway. It's paid for now.
Paid out of the earnings,
but it would, by that very purpose, it would raise their power to pay their utility bills.
All right.
So that their dividends, in effect, would become an offset to their utility bills.
Yeah, it's a way to distribute income into the society. Yeah, absolutely needed. Yeah, the technological. Sorry.
Taking that into the private realm, I can recall well, this goes back now 20 years or more ago, in fact closer to 30 years, Bill Murray great president of the United Steelworkers in the days of its really mightiest days, used to tell me with no sense of feeling that this was socially irresponsible, that the steelworkers couldn't care less what happened to the price of steel as a result of their labor contracts, that that was not the responsibility of the union, and indeed, particularly in periods of wage stabilization, during World War II, and again, and even more so in the Korean War, the union became the chief lobbyist for the industry in getting price increases through the government stabilization machinery, just so that they could then, the companies would have the money to pay a wage increase which was dictated by a government board. The Wage Stabilization Board would come down with an order. Then the union would go through the back door of the White House to hit the price stabilization authorities over the head to give, and this specifically happened in the 1952 strike, $5 a ton more to the steel industry. And then after everything got worked out, they got the clearance for the $5 a ton more on basic steel, but then the iron ore producers came in, hey, wait a minute, you left us out. So the union had to go back again and negotiate a supplemental price increase. This was obviously not in the interest of the survival of, first of all, the cost of the defense effort, which in the Korean War was a big consumer of steel, and still is, as a matter of fact, and even in terms of what has happened to the steel industry recently, this was part of what started it down the toboggan.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot.
And isn't it extraordinary that we do not, in our common debates, connect that process with the fact that a typical steel worker can't buy a home today.
And indeed hasn't got a job in most cases.
He may not even have a job. But in this process, we've priced the ability to buy out of the market. At this very second, the power to build houses in terms of quality and quantity and design and beauty and adequacy of landowner is unlimited. And yet it's common to hear today that the typical man, young man going into business, will not ever own a home.
Just as a footnote, the steelworker who can't buy a home is, by and large, those who still have jobs, and it's certainly a dwindling number, is earning double or triple what the average worker in America is when you take his basic wage and so you know the bad straits. And once you got an ESOP concept supplementing the money wage, you'd have a different ballgame.
Yeah, you have the ESOP concept as a way of distributing income or involving the worker, as it were, within a corporation, or even in a more public sense.
Well, and giving him more money.
But it would also increase the capital formation capability overall that we could use to bring the technology and the production that it has. Right?
Would lower the cost of financing enormously. I think you could have under two-factor financing. You could have capital financing costs at rates that would not exceed 4%. And have it unlimited so long as the project was feasible. What does that mean? That means as long as there are consumers
who want
to buy it.
Yeah, right.
And if you're systematically building earning power into the consumers, that's greater than if you're systematically limiting them to wages alone and through technology eliminating their jobs.
Yeah, you'd still be testing it in the marketplace.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Now, you do, Hal, to get into some realistic concerns, it is a tough transition in the thinking of workers and equally of managers.
And the general citizenry, perhaps.
Well, no, but I'm not thinking now of the ownership aspect of it, but the actual operational aspect. You know, the worker says, his company has just gone ESOP, and he now collectively owns 60%, 70%, perhaps even 80% of the total equity in that corporation. But he still sees the old foreman, the old supervisor, and the old middle manager, and right up to the executive suite. Everybody's same guys doing the same thing in very much the same way. And he says, hey, what's happened here? And that's, I know Lou has been through some of those experiences, and perhaps he could talk a little about how people accommodate and recognize that it is possible to be owners and at the same time not get into an anarchistic situation where everybody says, hey, wait a minute, you can't tell me what to do, I'm going to do it my way.
Well, all right,
that's
a question.
Yeah. The function, the explanation to people involved begins by explaining to them that ownership and management are functionally different things. The function of the owner is to protect his capital and to collect the wages of his capital. The function of the manager is to manage, and there are certain characteristics that go with that. That doesn't mean that one who enters the labor force as a janitor shouldn't, with competence, as many of our great heroes of industry did, fight his way up, educate himself, climb up, and become the chairman of the board. That mobility, of course, has to be maintained, and it is terribly precious. But the thing that begins to make changes occurs when dividends begin to flow into the pockets. And although the ESOP operates to accumulate capital in effect, make the retired labor worker a capital worker and a producer all his life, he can collect the wages of his capital in the meanwhile. And it is possible for corporations, using the right technology, and Senator Long has a bill in Congress to improve this, but it's possible to pay wages in pre-tax dollars, dividends in pre-tax dollars as though they were wages, which gives full recognition to the fact that the wages of capital to Mr. A are just as important as the wages of his labor. And the longer he lives, the more important it is.
Yeah, that would become more important through time.
It's the dividend check.
Yeah.
It's the realization. That's what tells him that I'm earning as a capital worker.
Yeah.
That's the thing that finally does it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, one of the things that also aids in this is happening even independently of ESOPs, but that makes this transition then an awful lot easier, is the thing that we were discussing earlier. Corporations recognizing that it is very much in their interest to cut through some of these veils of secrecy and to let the employees in on all the hard facts of life affecting the corporation and what the executive salary levels are and all the rest of these things that have been said, well, this is none of your business, that the workers ought to know all those things. And that also, through these various participational mechanisms, the workers, autonomous work teams, in some auto plants now, the workers have the right to stop the assembly line when they see something that's affecting the quality or the safety of the operation. And I asked the vice president at Ford, well, now, are you having a lot of troubles with it? He said, well, we really thought we would, that people would abuse this right. Not at all. They're doing it in ways that help us as well as protect them.
Well, nothing might,
They know it's a team problem.
Right,
yeah, right.
that's right.
Nothing would. I was just going to say, nothing would encourage people to have a greater understanding or interest in that understanding in the company than if they did begin to start having an ownership in it. They would have the interest in understanding that company in a way that traditionally perhaps they hadn't.
But they like to feel part of the enterprise, and the more substance there is to that feeling, obviously, the more real and consistent and dependable it'll be.
That could be part of a more cooperative attitude in terms of business in general that would be to encourage.
Right.
One of the other tone deafness areas is the area of the traditional robber baron capitalist who says, what's the problem? As long as everyone can get a job, maybe he doesn't get the wages he wants, as long as he gets a job. Maybe he was a top steel technician last year and he doesn't have a job now, but he can certainly get a job as a dishwasher.
Yeah, right.
Or as a houseboy, or maybe driving a truck, or pumping gas.
Get subscription to Horatio Alger.
The important thing is...
Or Playboy.
Or Playboy. The important thing is that if we take a hard look at what the United States Constitution means in terms of there being two ways to earn income, you cannot avoid the conclusion that it says that every citizen has the right to be productive. And if the going way in which goods and services are produced is primarily or heavily capital, he's got a right to buy and pay for out of what it earns and to receive that capital. You get exactly the same result under the Equal Protection Clause. The Equal Protection Clause says that every citizen is entitled to equal protection of the laws. Access to credit, capital credit is a matter of law. To give the rich access to credit to acquire more capital,
they don't need it.
Who relatively speaking don't need it, and to deny it to the poor, who are going to turn the world upside down if they don't get it, because they're not going to roll over and die or be wards of charity or parasites voluntarily when they know it's possible to solve the problem.
And yet that's the way the banking system tends to work.
That is the way it's going. And again, all this invariably comes back to the one group of people who have the power to raise the question with impunity. That is to say, UAW could say to anyone that it bargains for, or the machinists could say to every one of the airlines, or the pilots, or any one of the unions could say, look, you're planning to finance a certain amount of growth this year. We want to talk about financing that through us. We think we can show you why it's more advantageous. We believe we can convince you, or you should know this without, that we'll be better employees if we do it that way.
There are advantages.
Let's talk about it.
There are advantages to you that are in a business managerial sense that are available to you given the tax structure of the United States law system and so forth that they could realize and so forth. So it's a thing that could lead, could lead the general citizenry toward asking that question about the economy. The labor movement could lead the whole general citizenry toward that.
Exactly.
And one wonders why the political leadership of our nation hasn't brought this up in the political dialogue.
Well, to some extent it is under discussion in the Senate. One of the interesting things that has come out of this recent turmoil in the airlines is the degree to which unions at Western Air, at Eastern, at Republic are all taking an initiative in discussing with their managements. Give us up to 25% of the stock in this company, so that is beginning to happen. Another place, Harold, where this whole ESOP thing is so timely is that we are undergoing, as we said earlier, this enormous change in the workplace because of the developments in the technological field and the need for brand new industries, highly automated. The workers in America and the labor movement has never been Luddite in its approach, but there has been, understandably, great apprehension about the dislocative impact of these changes.
Particularly the trend,
And through ESOPs, you've got the worker now in a position to say, well, I don't really have to fear this. If it undercuts the stability of my immediate job, first of all, I will, through my corporation, be in a position to insist that the company take on part of the burden of retraining. But over and beyond that, I will be benefiting from the enhanced earnings of this corporation.
Because he has a piece of the ownership and
That's
income
right.
of the company.
I've got a piece of the new technology.
Well, that's the direction in which we need to go.
It's so elementary that I'm often asked the question, why, if it is absolutely beneficial to workers, beneficial to companies, beneficial to consumers, beneficial to finance, beneficial to the economy in the sense of eliminating inflation, why is it not done by everyone?
Exactly.
And
why?
The answer has to be only because it is an innovation.
Pastoral.
And I believe, and I don't know anyone who's ever said this, but I think it's true, I'm concluding that it's true, that the magnitude of the innovation in terms of its social importance is directly related to the magnitude of the resistance to it.
Could be some law of physics here.
After 1 billion years or so, man has not yet made his peace with the machine. Now there's your problem, you see. He starts out with the good book that said that he's created in the image of God, and so he's creative. But but it didn't go on in the fine print and say, and the first thing he's going to create is machines, and they're going to take his job, and he better get those machines so they're owned by all the people.
Well, you know, that does remind me of my own first visit to one of the automated engine plants out in Detroit. This happened to be the same Ford plant that Walter Reuther was being shown through. But I remembered as I went through the plant that the people who were on the various consoles monitoring the equipment all seemed very pleased with their new responsibilities and so on. But the happiest guy in the whole plant was one big buck of a guy who weighed 300 pounds, real towering giant, and he was the only guy in the place who was really sweating, and he was at a sort of a cathedral-like machine, a very imposing thing that was not functioning. It was just dark, nothing was happening, and he was rolling by hand unfinished engine blocks that were coming up from the foundry, and he was starting them down this automated line. And I said, well, what are you so happy about? And I said, geez, you're the only guy who seems to be really working in this. All the other guys were complaining about the only problem I got is I'm getting too fat because I don't move. But this guy was just as jolly as he could be. And he said, well, he says, see that machine? He says, that machine is supposed to handle all of this stuff, but they made the tolerances so exact that anything that's a little bit off and so on, it won't go through this machine. It rejects everything. We're getting 100% rejects on the stuff coming up from the foundry. He says, I, with my eye, can pick out which ones will go and which won't go, and so I'm back in full command. Well, you know,
a sense of pride of participation.
You know that the engineers, but that goes to your thing of the guy really resenting the machines. Like, boy, we really showed these bastards.
Well, people have gotten a sense of their own identity, right? People have gotten a sense of their own identity, and they get a sense of, it's like work. They get a sense of identity and purpose from that which they do. And if they see the machines doing that, they're going to have to get other things. You said that maybe art and other kinds of things that people have come involved with, that the machines can take over some of the jobs that have been traditionally done in a labor sense. I mean, it's a big sociological transformation.
The fact of the matter is that among the techniques of finance that employ the underlying logic of the ESOP are methods that can build ownership into any identifiable constituency, because the logic is the basic logic of capital financing. What these techniques do is make credit, capital credit, to buy capital accessible to economically underpowered people. They isolate the income from the capital until it pays for itself, and then, and only then, can the owner begin to collect the stream of income.
Right.
In the plan that we got about halfway through before it got politically shot down at the state level in Alaska, called the Alaskan General Stock Ownership Corporation Plan, we had negotiated, Senator Mike Gravel and I had negotiated the acquisition of British Petroleum's interest, 16.5% I think it was, in the Trans-Alaska pipeline.
Mammoth, yeah.
The statistics showed this, and it's since been proven to be an understatement. Firstly, there were 420,000 residents in Alaska. Everyone would have been made a shareholder at the outset. The purchase price would be $1,600,000,000. That was the depreciated book value. It would pay for itself in 4.5 years. So in the 5th year, it would begin to pay $4,000 in dividends per resident. $16,000 for a family of 4.
Right. You really
now, for a guy floating around on an ice cake, that's a pretty good income.
Right. Well, they would begin to have this income, and it could free people then to be concerned with some of the...
To do everything. I mean...
the matters of art and architecture, I mean, matters of the mind and spirit. It could be a liberating kind of thing that the technology might have been intended to do, but we have problems trying to get this birth happening.
Every once in a while I get a question that runs something like this. But what are we going to do with them if they all become capital workers?
Yeah. And if they were affluently leisured, if you have an affluently leisured society.
I found the way to answer the question. It took a lot of trouble to do it. But the answer to it is this. Well, let's not talk about them for the moment. Let's talk about you. Supposing you just inherited an income of $40,000 a year.
Right.
What would you do? Would you commit yourself to an asylum,
Right.
so that you could somebody could manage your time?
Right.
Oh, certainly not. I all my life I've wanted to do this and that and the other thing, but you know, them.
Yeah. Oh.
I said, all right, maybe it'll help you feel better. I've asked that question of 100 people or more, and they all say the same thing. I think that man was not born to toil. I think that he is full of things to do, that he's become distorted as the result of the workaday world. Maybe it won't be a generation or two till we really learn how to make our peace with the machine and to live like human beings. But I agree with Mr. Kirkland's statement. If toil were that really delightful and delicious and yummy, the rich would have kept it for themselves.
Yeah, well, that may very well be toil in the sense, and if you have a situation where you're going to lose your toil, but you could begin to have an ownership, so you have income, so you could be freed up, it would be the full liberating potentiality of the moment that makes this a very pregnant moment in the broader evolution of the world and United States economy and society. It's a very pregnant time. And if I may say so, we've had two gentlemen here that have labored mightily in their careers in terms of helping to bring an understanding of the broader implications that could help us all lead in that direction. It's an incredibly exciting moment. I'm terribly sorry, and we haven't even gotten into the communications, information environment, and so forth.
The third world?
The third world's another question we haven't gotten into, but I'm sorry, even in cable television, where we have more time to discuss some of these things, we've run out of time. We've run out of time for this segment. But it has been a great pleasure, if I may say so.
Good.
Mr. Raskin.
Thank you.
Louis, again, nice. I may remind you, it's been your pleasure to have the perceptions again on my immediate left of Mr. A.H. Raskin, the Dean of the Writers and Understanders, if we may, of the labor process within the American and world economy, and on my far left, Mr. Louis Kelso, the originator of ESOP and the techniques for generally expanding ownership of the technological means of production in the American and world economy. Happy to able to bring you those perceptions, and I'd invite you to tune in again next week. Sorry, we're right out of time for this week. See you next week, and gentlemen, once again, thank you very much indeed for participating and for everything.